Nice to see you all here, and nice that a lot of our friends out in the wide world will be watching us now. And if not tonight, you'll have a chance to see us later on the Facebook page.
All right.
I'm Metta Spencer, and I'm here in Toronto. And this is a panel that I have assembled. We want to speak together tonight about an issue that there's a lot of common interest among the panelists, although they don't really know each other until now. And we want to talk about sustainable farming and the production of food, the whole food system, and especially its connection to the issue of global warming, how the proper use of farming and the protection of the soil can sequester carbon and reduce global warming, and how the choice of food can make a difference. So the kinds of selection we make about our diet can make a difference. So I want to introduce our panelists. The first person will be an old friend I turn to whenever in need. She will always come to my rescue, and that is Joanna Santa Barbara, a dear friend who's now living in New Zealand, the South Island, in a kind of a farming community they're building. And she is interested, of course, in the whole food system, and especially choosing nutritious food that has been sustainably farmed. Next, Jodi, I see that your microphone is muted. Good. You want to unmute that. Thank you. This is Jodi Koberinski.
Hello.
And Jodi is in Waterloo. I assume you're in Waterloo. That's where you're supposed to be based. Jodi has, as we were getting kind of warmed up, she informed me that she's been working occasionally in India with Vandana Shiva. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
And is interested in agriculture and improving methods of agriculture. And Lloyd Helferty. Lloyd is I guess we could say in Toronto, because if I say Markham, Ontario, it won't mean much to anybody except people living in Ontario. And Lloyd is an agricultural engineering technologist. I guess that is maybe the word for it. Say a word or two so we can see your face, Lloyd.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay, very good. Joe, let me start off with you, because you actually sent me some notes that you'd made in preparation for running a food stall this weekend to try to talk people into the kind of diet they want to reach. So why don't you kick us off with a little kind of a summary of the points that you wanted to make in your street stall, your vending stall.
I'd be happy to do that, Metta, but I'd just like to set it in the context of the total impact of the food system on the environment in general, climate and soil, and how we produce food, how we use food, and how we waste food. And my little stall was mainly on the food we choose to eat and how different choices could have a big impact on climate change. I draw from drawdown the idea that changing to a more plant-based diet is, I think, the fourth most impactful measure that we could take that would have an influence on greenhouse gas emissions. So it was that little segment that I chose to present in this food-oriented festival that I was taking part in.
Nobody knows.
Yes, very, very good, Lloyd. Very helpful.
Actually, it's backwards on my computer, though.
No, it comes through the right way around. Yeah, we're a good team. Excellent. So that was particularly what I was
why don't you say who that book is by and what it is? Because I think everybody in the world ought to read it. Draw down comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, edited by Paul Hawken. Okay. Tell us a little about the thing, Joe, before you proceed, if you will.
Tell you about Drawdown or what I was presenting?
The book, just a bit.
Drawdown. Okay. It's something that I find enormously useful because it helps me to work out where to put my efforts in that Paul Hawken and his quite huge team of scientists have rank ordered the emissions reducing potential of 100 possible interventions. So it definitely helps me to decide what's worth working on, and is why I really have decided to have some, not total, but some focus on this issue of the impact of the food system. I mean, there are still all the other things to do as well, like stopping mining for oil and gas and so on, but food is huge. And so it was that little bit of it, how we choose our diet, that I was focusing on. Moving towards a more plant-based diet, eating less meat and dairy is a big deal.
Okay.
But I can see Jodi wants to say something.
Jodi does, but she better unmute her microphone if she wants to speak. Jodi?
No, I just think it's not just Paul Hawken who's onto this. It's one of those moments where we're in a sort of a 100th monkey situation, because whether it's that initiative or it's, Thomas Homer Dixon, the upside of down, whether it's, the 4 for 1,000 initiative that everybody should look up online that came out of the Paris agreements, which is, showing how the soil is the hidden secret in our battle to draw down greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere. And so when we look at these new, all these ways that Joanna is speaking of growing food, at the root of the difference is how we approach the soil. And this is starting to be lost. And Lloyd, you can maybe speak to more of this, because we've both been part of the regenerative agriculture conversation, or this move to a climate smart approach to food that looks at, well, if we just stop tilling, we're going to achieve this carbon sink. When in fact, we really need to be getting that soil organic matter, deeper than that 6 inches in a chemical system. And so we're in a place where there's lots of great ideas out there. We're starting to talk about the potential of soil to deal with carbon, but like so many of the sustainable changes that are being promoted, we're in a situation where one of my concerns, I hope we can talk about a little bit over the next 50 minutes, is how not to have this message co-opted such that we take practices that are just business as usual, and we map a piece of the, we look at carbon and no-till. If we just look at that moment and we don't look at the entire system, which is Joanna's invitation, from starting with the seed all the way to who's eating it, and the different interrelationships that are along there. If we take just a techno-fix solution, we're going to find that some of these same systems that Lloyd and myself and others are promoting will be twisted into another kind of message. So carbon in the soil, the ability for the soil to sequester carbon, can take care of a huge chunk of our climate problem. But how we do that, what kind of soil management we introduce, is going to matter. And incremental change isn't going to be enough. We need a wholesale shift in how we approach soils. I don't know if, Lloyd, that segues into maybe some of the simple soil science or a conversation you want to have about some of this, to make folks understand who are watching why we describe soil as this sponge for carbon in the air.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, the program I wanted to talk about actually does segue well from what you just talked about. And so we've been developing, actually, through Science for Peace. We have a community or a community of people, a working group within Science for Peace called the Community Sustainability Working Group. And we've been meeting probably for the last 2 years or so in Toronto, probably about between 6 and 12 people on and off at each meeting, discussing these sort of issues. And as we talk about sustainable communities, the one thing we always come back to is food. And so this is why we developed a program, because I've been involved actually in the biochar initiatives for probably 8 or 9 years already. I knew about soil carbon and the importance of soil carbon, and biochar being just a small component, a part of the fix. It's one technology, but the main point is let's increase soil carbon, as Jodi has just said. And the capacity to increase and for soils to sequester carbon and hold that carbon is absolutely enormous. Carbons or soils already contain about twice as much carbon as is in the atmosphere already. And even minor increases in soil carbon can have a huge effect. I did it early on in my career as a
You say a huge effect.
technologist in the biochar sector.
You're not hearing me. Okay.
Well,
I was wondering, when you say a little addition to the amount of carbon can have a huge effect, you mean that this is the influence on global warming, because it'll reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere. Is that what you're suggesting? You hearing me?
I think you might be frozen.
Oh, yeah.
Lloyd. Oh, Lord.
So I can jump in there really quickly, and I'm going to preface with letting folks at home know I am not a soil scientist, but that this information is quite accessible, and one of the great places to look for this information is Regeneration International. It's a new umbrella organization that brought together folks from Organic Consumers Association, Navdanya, the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movements, and a number of other civil society or social benefit organizations. And on that website, there's some really good background information on this process of carbon sequestration in the soil. And this 4 for 1,000 initiative basically says that for every 4% increase or 0.4% increase in soil organic matter year on year can make a significant difference to a country's carbon goals to meet their Paris agreement. So certainly in this situation for Canada, the general math that we're doing is if we shifted 50% of Canadian agriculture to organic soil management practices, we might be able to take care of a fairly significant portion of our commitment that we would actually need to do very little else in Canada to meet our global targets, but shift how we manage our forest and our agricultural soils.
Okay, now
go ahead, Joanna. Yeah.
Can I ask you, Jodi, if you have ideas about strategies to make that shift? The shift is occurring in New Zealand, but slowly. It's happening, but it's slow, and it's too slow for the dwindling carbon budget.
Well, a couple of things that we've found in our activism work over the years, I think one of the things that you just did this past weekend is absolutely the thing that we do. We have to get out and start talking to people face to face. The internet is wonderful. It's putting us all together, and it's putting us in front of Metta's wonderful audience that she's gathered over the past 30 plus years. And that's important. But coming out to Nathan Phillips Square on April 22nd and supporting Rachel Parent's Kids Right to Know movement and the Generation Earth Day celebration, where we're going to be having guests from Regeneration International. We're going to be having elders from the traditional ecological knowledge keepers group. So Ray Owl and Willie Pine and some of the other elders who are, tackling aerial spraying of glyphosate in their forests. We're going to bring all these people together, and we're hoping folks come out physically to talk to farmers and see other people's work who are doing things in a different way, and that are, it's great to get together and march against Monsanto and do all the things that we do to say this won't do anymore. We can't have things the way that they are. But it's much more powerful to tell people, look, I don't know all the answers, but I know this is a difference that's being made over here, and ask for the world that we want, rather than, I can talk endlessly about what's happening with climate change science and why we should all be running out of our doors right now, screaming in a state of emergency, that incrementalism won't help. But I'm going to inspire someone when I show them that my neighbor, Angie Koch, with her farm is able to feed 80 families and do so employing 4 people. And that if we had surrounded Waterloo region with farms like that, we could look after 50% of our vegetables.
Now, let me intervene in a way, because I have this bad feeling that I interrupted Lloyd and distracted, and he froze and had to leave. He's no longer here with us.
Well, it looked like his computer froze.
Yeah. Well, he was one of the things that I thought a point he was going to make, would I imagine bridge the two positions that we've already heard, yours and originally Joe's point. And that is, he has this notion about climate smart food.
Yes.
And I thought he would talk about that, and maybe he'll come back and do so. But the interesting thing to me was that we sat in a cafe once, and he said he started talking to the waitress about how you could by your choice of what you're going to order for your meal influence global warming. In principle you could, because yes. But there's certain ways of farming and certain foods that you can farm, and I can't elaborate there, but certain foods which will not only not add to the CO2 in the atmosphere, because agriculture by and large is a big component of the source of global warming for greenhouse gas, but certain kinds of food can be raised that are not only carbon neutral, but even carbon negative. And that if we could identify what those were and have it labeled in the supermarket that this is a climate.
Well, I could provide some overview of the ways to think about that can help people get started. And let me preface by saying, when we're talking climate smart, we're talking about a concept and not necessarily what's being promoted at the level at the UN, where climate smart is becoming a euphemism for chemical intensive agriculture. So truly climate smart agriculture, and what we're aiming for when we speak about that, is respecting the nitrogen cycle, respecting the water cycle, and reducing the overall impact of a crop on the system as a whole. And so I look at something like millet versus rice. Rather than pushing rice into regions of Africa, why are we not encouraging people in Africa to grow their already local adapted millets, which use 1/4 of the amount of water to grow? Or in India, rather than expanding the area that grows rice, why aren't we encouraging the growth of sorghum, which is another crop that's less intensive on water? The way we grow food. So when I choose organic, this isn't just about, there's this pushback from the chemical companies that want to think that people like us are promoting a kind of selfishness with organic, that I'm worried about whether I personally eat a pesticide. When I buy organic food, I'm not contributing to the use of synthetic nitrogen. Synthetic nitrogen, some studies show, is responsible for just the manufacturing of nitrogen alone is responsible from some 7 to 13% of the greenhouse gas footprint of conventional food. And so when I'm using a chemical nitrogen fertilizer, just the process of doing that alone, the creation of it, I need to use fracking in my country to make fracking makes nitrogen fertilizer, because it's a very energy heavy process, and natural gas is used in the process to pull nitrogen out of the air. And so when I use a chemical nitrogen, there's a very complex term in environment science that you may be familiar with, you ladies, called emergy, E-M as in Mary, E-M-E-R-G-E, emergy. And that's the embedded energy in a product. So what's the embedded energy in making nitrogen fertilizer versus using cover cropping and working with leguminous plants like lentils and chickpeas to fix nitrogen in the soil and make that available to plants in subsequent years? So I don't have to add a chemical into the soil. So it's not even so much, I can talk about millet or rice, but if that millet is grown using chemicals, then in the soil as a fertilizer, I have a nitrogen footprint to that process. So we have to really think about the multifunctionality of the way that we farm. It's really attractive and seductive to think we're going to grow massive amounts of food, and be intensive. I think intensification, agricultural intensification, as a way of being environmentally responsible. But if I need to nitrogen fertilize all of that rather than having a diverse food forest or permaculture or perennials that are in an intercropped and rotational situation. So how we choose to grow has a climate footprint as well.
Okay, now couldn't that, however, be something that a consumer, that kind of information could be useful to a consumer? Because if I did my own grocery shopping, anymore, I have it all delivered. But if I went around the grocery store looking for what to put into my shopping cart, and I knew that this particular thing on the box, if it said, what is the emerging content of this product? And I look at another jar and I say, well, this is less, then I should buy that one, right? And that my consumption patterns would not only affect my health, presumably, and these two dimensions might not be exactly lined up, but it would also make a difference in terms of my addition to the greenhouse gas in the environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've got I'm going to just quickly share a resource, and Joanna, then I'll let you jump in. I've cut and pasted into our chat. It's the Center for Food Safety.org's Cool Foods campaign. And this is about climate smart foods, food choices you can make that keep climate in mind. And so this is things like, instead of reaching for that burger, can you make that with lentils? But let me just pull up the website here. And Joanna, if you want to jump in, I'll jump back. There's they've got a 5-point thing: eat fresh, unprocessed foods, buy local and in season, choose organic, eliminate industrial meat and dairy, and opt for pasture raised products, and reduce food waste and compost at home. Simple things we can all do.
Yeah, that's really good. And that indeed was the sort of message that I was trying to get across to people. But it just in terms of grocery shopping and back to Metta's desire to incorporate some of these ideas, I guess the shopper's tolerance for reading labels has some limits. And I would think that for the ordinary shopper, just going for what's labeled organic might do the best job, rather than further complications about embedded energy, useful as they are. But they're probably going to be rolled in to organic production in general. So if you go for organic, I think you're doing the best that you can.
Joe, I mean, she's just said there's a difference between millet and sorghum and rice. So if I'm at the, shopping for a grain, it might be that I want to know that all of them could be raised organically, but I might want to know that I should choose millet. Wouldn't that make a difference or not?
Well, I think it probably is part of what Jodi mentioned before. It depends how it was grown, and it would be difficult to specify all of that on labels. Although, and just picking up Jodi's point, if meat is a desired part of a diet, asking questions about how that meat was provided and whether it was pasture raised and humanely dealt with and so on, I think one can do that with many butchers. You can ask those questions.
Well, also, a few years ago, I got interested in trying to figure out how much energy was being consumed in the production of various kinds of meat. It wasn't easy to find out, but I did find out that I think, clearly beef is something that you don't want to do, to eat much of, but poultry is better. I think fish are better. I actually had somebody who worked out the per kilogram, export of CO2 in the environment that is necessary for the production of each of these types of meat. I don't see that kind of information displayed very widely, but wouldn't it also be useful for a consumer to know that?
Yeah.
So we've got Lloyd back with his hand up in the attendees list. Maybe you can try to patch him back in, Metta.
All right.
And while you're doing that, I'm just going to mention that as we're talking about this, I'm just going online and pulling up the resources. It's one of my rules is spidering information. There's the coolfarmtool.org. So COOLFARMTOOL.org. And there they have a cool farm tool, and it helps you calculate the global warming impact of your food choices. It's a tool to help educate consumers, understand a little bit better about some of those impacts.
And Lloyd is back with us. Bless your heart, Lloyd. Now unmute your microphone, and we'll all be a community, and we'll sing songs together. Turn your microphone mute off, Lloyd. He doesn't look like he sees what I'm saying.
Bottom left corner.
He's not hearing you. Type it in. Would you do that?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. My internet broke.
Here we go. We got it back.
Glad you're back, Lloyd.
Welcome home, Lloyd.
Yeah, I had to restart my whole internet thing. Something with Zoom broke it, and even my wife lost her internet. I had to restart the whole thing.
All right. Anyway, I'm interrupting people right and left. I'm sorry. It's very impolite. But let me go back to Jodi, who was in the middle of something that I just interrupted.
Okay. I was just mentioning that some of these things we're seeking to measure, people are becoming much more crafty about the sorts of apps we have. And there's this new tool for farmers called the coolfarmtool.org. And it's a calculator for checking out your, basically your global warming footprint on practices on your farm. And you can run, your farm size and, your fertilizer practices and your irrigation practices and your inputs, everything through, and see what it comes out the other side, trying to help farmers start to understand ways that they can make small changes on their farm to reduce the footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Good. Joe, can you make the link back? I was, maybe I introduced you wrong as somebody just as implying that you're only interested in the nutritional value of various kinds of food, but I'm sure that's not the case. And I don't want to belabor the point that the consumer's choice can have an impact, but is that connected to what you were in the middle of saying 20 minutes ago?
My focus here is on the climate and other environmental impact of food systems. And I thought it worthwhile talking in the thing that I did on Sunday, presenting these ideas in a setting, I thought it worthwhile talking about the fact that there's quite a strong correspondence between good climate choices in food and nutritional value. There's an interesting Italian institute called the Berea Institute that has constructed a food pyramid. We've all seen food pyramids with the things that we should be eating lots of down the bottom, narrowing down to the things we should be eating least of. And the Berea Institute has a matching one that's upside down, showing the climate and environmental impact of foods. And it pretty much corresponds. The things that we should be eating lots of, fruit and veggies, have the least climate impact, and the things that we should be eating least of, like beef, have the most climate impact. So these things have not a total, but quite a good correspondence. And another point that I added on to this presentation is that it also has to do with affordability of food. Affordability, that if your food budget is constrained, then to adopt Lloyd's term, the climate smart food is often cheapest, and the least climate friendly food is often most expensive. There's a little bit of conflict here with affordability and climate smart, a little bit of conflict with organic, which currently some organic food tends to be more expensive than the non-organic. So there's a little bit of a mismatch between affordability and climate smart, but on the whole, there's a good match with affordability and climate smart.
There wouldn't be any connection between organic food and nutritiousness, though I understand that the quality of the food in terms of how healthy it keeps you isn't necessarily correlated one way or another with organic, as I've understood the recent research. Am I wrong?
I'm going to just jump in there really quickly. Part of the problem with these sorts of comparisons is that the conditions of the soil of the farm, the weather conditions, that given year, was it a dry or an overly wet season in which the study is drawing the information. And sometimes we can find that there's a greater difference between locations in terms of nutrition than between organic and non-organic. But broadly speaking, the literature is pointing to the fact that organic is higher in certain micronutrients in certain conditions, and that the reason it's been played out like it's not more nutritious is the interpretation of the study. I, for one, consider it significant if there's 17% more in a particular mineral that's required by my body, even if that's significant to me. The scientific definition of significance is we consider whether you have the minimal amount of required mineral or nutrient below which you get scurvy or below which you get rickets, but it doesn't point to the measure that is for optimal health. And so in my world, if organic dairy has 30% more CLA in it than non-organic dairy, that's a significant issue to me. But the way that it's reported downplays some of those differences. So we will be back and forth on this one for a long time, but let's just look at the basics. If my soil is healthier and more complex and more biodiverse, my plant is going to be healthier, my people are going to be healthier.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We've lost everybody all of a sudden, but you and I now.
Everybody's gone except now I've got Joe back coming in. And,
okay.
I don't know what's happening with everybody, but I hope now, Joe, you've got to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have you back.
No, I just lost audio, so I found that previously leaving and rejoining repairs the problem.
I'm going to just mention that Andre Lieu, that's Leu, he's the former president of the IFOAM, International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, just released a book in the winter called Poisoning Our Children. And his argument is, as an organic farmer and advocate, he's less concerned, although the science is pretty strong, that we get better nutrient build up in our organic foods than in our non-organic. When you're poisoning children with pesticides, you're going to want every nutrient you have coming to you, because there's something dramatically not nutritious about exposing children to pesticides. And I'm using the term nutritious in a very non-scientific way when I say that. What I'm really implying is health. There's a health impact to exposing children to pesticides in food that we are unclear about. That, to me, whether organic food is healthier or more nutritious, the nutrients I can measure in the food, whether there's more of them or not, to me is outweighed by the fact that they're not, the food grown organically is not contributing to the pesticide load in the environment.
Okay, now let's go off in a different direction, and that is we're going to have a larger population of this world. Is it how much land and labor and other resources like water are required for overall, if you compare organic to, I guess, factory farming, how much difference is there in the ability of, in the future, to provide adequate food for the growing population?
So we did a study at Navdanya. We did a study of Navdanya in 2011 called Health Per Acre. Mm-hmm. And in that study, we were able we looked at, I think we looked at about 17 different communities where we were drawing data from. And when you look across the board, organic food per acre as an approach is going to produce 2.5 times or more nutrition per acre. And so they looked at what was the conventional system. It was a corn soy rotation. They looked at the organic system, in which pulses were grown, vegetables were grown, rice, millet, and other grains were grown. Mm-hmm. And so maybe if I'm doing an acre of soybean at a time, I can produce a certain yield of that measurable, tradable commodity. But that's just measuring what's the grain I took off that acre. It's not measuring what were the inputs, what were the calories in and the calories out. And then what was the human food capacity of growing that 1 acre of thing versus an agroecological intercropped multifunctional approach to a farm where I'm getting some rice and I'm getting some capsicum and I'm getting some turmeric and I'm getting, some fruits and I'm getting some lentils. So part of the problem is if I'm going to just do input substitution and do conventional style farming, but friendly it up with organic, like we typically do in North America. And hey, that's a great effort. I'm not being critical of my friends and neighbors who farm that way. But if we don't fundamentally shift toward agroecological food systems, which are looking at perennial systems, which are looking at food grown and consumed locally, which are looking at seasonality, which are looking at moving away from processing, that are looking at food commons. My scholarship over the next few years, I'm building on Jose Luis Vivero-Pol, did a fabulous PhD dissertation that the world should read on recommoning food and this notion of moving past commodification and looking at other values for food. So we have to be careful that I don't want to fall into, if we just do everything the same, but we use organic inputs, we're just going to die a little slower. We have to fundamentally change the underlying system and what we think the game of food is and how we do it as a community. the Dacha food movement in Russia, DACHA. Everybody should look this up too. This is a movement where 17 million Russians go out into the countryside in the evenings, on weekends, and they're growing food in the community garden style. And 60% of the vegetables consumed in Russia are grown in this manner. And someone did some math. If we did this on every lawn in North America, for every front lawn in North America, did the Dacha program and did a gardening program there, it would meet America's produce needs with leftovers to trade.
I noticed that way back when I was looking at, along with a colleague, John Bacher, I was looking at the portion of food that is produced in Russia by people going to their dachas. They
yes.
Cottage, and that's where they raise a lot of the food. And the workers on the collective farms, the kolkhozes, were allowed to have a small plot of their own to raise their own food. And it turns out this was something like, I think 40% of the food that was actually raised in Russia was produced on these little plots, little small garden-like things. And yet in the official statistics of the country, they don't even count food that comes from those sources. It's as if it didn't exist because statistically they think.
But this is what Vandana teaches about regenerative economy. We only count it if it happened outside the home. So even though the word economics comes from econos, it's a reflection of the home, management of the home, the economy. And yet today, if it didn't take someone out of the home and exchange for a commodified, whether my labor is commodified or the product of my labor is commodified, if that commodity doesn't move and it's tracked, then economics didn't happen. And yet all seeds up until 150 years ago were done this way. All seed trade was done this way. So I think, we've only done it this way 150 years. Why are we imagining that we couldn't be commoners again?
I think both Joe and Lloyd want to say something. Joe, you go first.
Okay, I have a tiny thing to add and a point to make, and then a question back to Jodi. I'm part of a common food management system in running a common orchard. And it has huge social benefits as well as producing really lovely fruit for lots of people. Another comment back to your original question, Metta, about how do we feed an increasing population, global population, it is back to the plant-based diet. We definitely can't afford to provide a population of 9 million with a Western diet, a Western meat-based diet. That is absolutely impossible. We need some of the food that the 60 billion animals that are domesticated by humans. We need some of the huge tracts of land that they use to grow crops that will directly feed people. And I might add, although it's a different topic, we need to return some of that land to nature. Mm-hmm. So that's the comment I want to make. But I have a question that I've actually been wanting to put to Jodi and possibly Lloyd, since I heard what you do, Jodi, and what you think about, and that is the issue of peasant farming. Peasant farming that often uses organic practices as part of traditional methods, and certainly highly mixed farming on small plots, often with simply farm-based inputs in using organic methods. And whether we should be consciously, deliberately, systematically supporting peasant farming in this way. I mean, that's how food is produced for a lot of the world. That's the knowledge that exists in the minds of small farmers. Should we be deliberately supporting peasant farming?
Yeah, I think, we were really lucky last week in Rome for 3 days. The FAO held the second ever symposium on agroecology. And what we're hearing from those peasant farmers is that they would like to see that what they're offering is recognized as a technology and an innovation. Because we use this word peasant in a good way, and we've been invited to do so by Via Campesina and these other movements for peasant farming. But what they're really looking for us to do is use this language of scaling out agroecology and agroecological practices and taking a more respected view of that as a technological know-how versus this, should we protect old ways and isn't that quaint? Because there's a lot of pressure that those of us, in the West are advocating for a style of farming none of us would do or want to do. But really who's making the call for this are farmers in the global South who are saying, we know what we're doing. We need to have the resources. Don't give us GE, stop the land grab. Make the difficult political decisions that need to be made to protect us to be able to grow food in a way that's truly sustaining. And I think that making connections between peasant farming and the SDGs, we've realized that agroecology satisfies 11 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Really?
Yep. We can achieve 11 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by transitioning our agriculture to agroecology. But Lloyd, you've also dealt with farmers, and maybe you want to jump in on this one too.
Yeah, well, I can't say that I've dealt with farmers as much to say in the small scale, but what the program we've been discussing, and I got cut off. This is the second time I had to restart my internet. Something wrong with Zoom for my computer, it seems. But I had been talking about the discussion we've been having at the Community Sustainability Working Group. And the program we put together, we call it Climate.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, Lloyd, you're so close.
Oh, no.
I'm going to finish a sentence for him. He was about to say we call it climate smart food, I think. Now we'll never know.
Well, and if Lloyd gets back on in our last 10 minutes, the rest of us are going to go silent and let Lloyd jump in. So while we're in a little bit of a limbo, I'm going to put a bit of a plug on the Praxis Permaculture Festival in New Brunswick, June 1st to 3rd. Joanna, you had that good question. What are the things we can do? We can get out and build community. We can celebrate and we can learn new skills. So we're going to be teaching people 3 days of living soils workshops. They're going to learn how to make compost teas. We're going to learn a little bit of soil food web science. We're going to build some compost piles. They're going to learn how to can with Grammy B. She's a dumpster diving grandma. She's going to teach us. She's going to teach us how to do some canning and do some drying. We've got Wayne Groshko teaching us about off-grid power, and we have Mana Cleland teaching people about basic herbalism, backyard herbalism, how to work with the weeds that are growing where you are. 4 workshops, 3 days, all your vegan food provided $125 a person. We've got music in the evenings, because if you're not dancing, why are you at the revolution? And I think it's these kinds of parties that we're doing. How do
they get to you? Where do they get their...
So we're going to come look up. So we're on Facebook already. You can find us at Praxis Permaculture Party on Facebook. You can go online. Praxis Project NB for New Brunswick. Praxis. We've got a bunch of young musicians who could be playing anywhere that weekend, but they want to learn how to farm. So we've got Totemic and Indus Tribe, who are like fire spitting DJs. We have a Kaylee on this Sunday because we want it to work for everybody. We have a kid village. We're growing your food in humanure. You're going to learn from the grassroots up. It'll be a lot of fun.
Let me get to...
Sounds terrific.
because I like to play the devil's advocate, and in this case, I really am the devil. I am an eater, and I intend to continue eating meat. And Joe, I'm sorry, but here we have this issue. I am diabetic, and
yes,
diabetic people should not eat too much carbohydrate. And I feel it. I go get sleep if I eat too much carbohydrate. So I've got a choice. Either I concentrate on fats, or I concentrate on carbohydrates, or I concentrate on protein. And it's definitely better for me to concentrate on protein. But I have 2 points. One is I organized a weekly lecture where an epidemiologist named Prabhat Jha talked about his research in India. He has a huge project going there where he follows 1 million deaths in India and looks at the household, the food practices and the health issues, all kinds of things that go on, and what causes people to die in India. And it happens that, because Indians have a lot of vegetarians, you have a huge database with people who've been vegetarians all their lives and with, consistently. And so you really can make comparisons. He says that in terms of health, he can't find any difference between vegetarians' longevity and health and that of non-vegetarians, except for women. When it comes to women, the women who are non-vegetarians live longer, and he thinks it's because women traditionally eat after the men and children eat in the dinners in India, and therefore they get whatever's left over, which tends to be the high carb food and not enough protein of any kind. And therefore those women, the Indian women who don't eat meat, do not live as long as women who do eat meat. And if you can control for all kinds of other factors, that happens to be true. So in other words, I don't believe anybody anymore who says that vegetarianism is a health practice, that you should do it just for that reason. But in my own case, I know, and I think a lot of evidence suggests that people who eat too much carbohydrate and not enough protein don't do as well. Therefore, I continue to eat meat. Now, I also believe in, there are 2 other reasons for my argument. One is I believe this Alan Savory fellow who finds that herds of wild animals in nature are really beneficial to preventing desertification.
Yes.
Because they stir up the soil and leave your droppings and move on in just the right timing. And so I would hate to see all kinds of wild hoofed animals abolished. The third point that I would make about that is that we've got meat coming from vats pretty soon. And I think people who are interested in or being vegetarians for the sake of humanitarian concern or humane treatment of animals, I could understand that and appreciate that. But if we grow our meat in vats, that relieves that as an issue, I would think. Okay, you have a few minutes in which to shoot me down on all.
Well, I'm terribly sorry, Metta. I'm not going to shoot you down. I'm not even going to have an argument with you, which I know will wound you deeply.
Go in a history of fighting.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Of course, you have medical reasons for eating meat, which is required to keep you healthy. So you should keep eating meat. But that's a special condition. The second thing to say is that nobody's talking about abolishing wild animals and creating desertification. And the third point to make is that what's important here is that globally we eat less meat. It's extremely important that globally we eat less meat. It doesn't mean no meat. And it's I think the animal meat that continues to be produced will do well to move to some of the carbon sequestering practices involved in silvopasture, which is putting a lot of trees in paddocks where animals graze, and also managed grazing, which derives from some of Alan Savory's better ideas. Not all of his ideas were good. That's right. But managed grazing is a really good idea. So there's nothing to fight about there, but Jodi also wants to come in on this.
Yeah, I was going to just pick up on a couple of those things. One, this notion of lab meat is the outcropping of the worst form of ideological thinking around our food system. I've got 4 areas that I'm really focusing on that I call the hidden drivers in the food system. This isn't a new analysis. It's just put together in this way. There's consolidation, incentivization, financialization, and nutritionism. Nutritionism is when we take the notion of food and health and we compartmentalize it. We break it apart. So I look at my carbs and my protein and my fat as if they're somehow separate from each other. And I don't look at my food anymore and my food in the context of the whole diet. And this notion of, if we just fractionate the lentils and we send the carbs over here and the proteins over there and we take the farting parts out over there, that we're going to still end up with the same nutritional impact as eating a decent tour dal. Probably there's something going to go missing there. And I would argue that this lab meat fixation, there's the notion that the steak is the gene or the impulse. The steak is the cow that should have run somewhere, and so the idea that I'm going to get the same nutritional benefit out of eating a piece of lab meat out of something that is a complex being, that it speaks to an arrogance in our science that got us into this trouble in the first place. So I hope our vegan friends don't fall for it and go down those pathways.
Okay. I'll just add one thing to that, that the estimates, supposing this move goes ahead, the estimates for when it will be available and usable are 10 to 20 years. And we don't have that much time with a dwindling carbon budget. We can't wait 10 to 20 years to solve that problem and do more deforestation to create more pasture for more cattle. We don't have that time.
Okay. You know what? We've come to the end, but I have my own little pitch to make. I want to remind people why we're doing this series. Well, actually, I like to do it anyway. I would do it forever if I can continue it. But the main thing is I started the idea as a way of providing information for people who are thinking about joining or attending and registering for a forum that's going to be taking place here in Toronto on May 30th and 31st. Science for Peace is organizing or sponsoring this forum called How to Save the World in a Hurry. And as Joe just said, we have to hurry. So the approach that we'll be taking is to identify 25 of the most promising public policy proposals that could be adopted widely throughout the world, everywhere, that would each reduce the probability of one of the 6 main threats to human future. There are, in my calculations, about 6 catastrophic events that could take place that would wipe out 1 billion people or more at a whack. And that would be war and weapons, especially nuclear, global warming, famine, pandemics, major radiation exposure from something like an explosion of a reactor, and cyber attacks. And so if you go to a certain website, you can find out about this project. And I hope you will, those of you who are free to come to Toronto, May 30th and 31st. I hope you will be so good as to register. Go to this website and have a look, because there are all kinds of good information there. It's called tosavetheworld.ca. And there we have other background information for people studying up on and trying to learn the value of various interventions or actions or policies that could be taken to solve all of these problems, or at least reduce the threat of all of them. So please take a look at that. And I started this series, so we'll have other discussions along the same lines about various topics. So far, we've talked about the impact of militarism on global warming. We've talked about forestry. We've talked about the importance of educating girls and providing family planning access for them, and so on. So we'll every week, every Monday, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have another one of these 1-hour discussions, such as we've had tonight, which I think has been absolutely fascinating. I'd like to continue it another couple of hours, get everybody online at the same time. At any rate, I thank you all very, very much for your contribution to this. I'm very grateful to you for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. And I'm glad that the viewers have tuned in. This video will stay on the Peace Magazine page, Facebook page, indefinitely. You can keep telling your friends to go look at it. And everybody's going to learn something, I think, from this evening's experience. Thank you very much, and good night.
Good night, Metta.
Good night.
Bye.